This is East Asia Tonight.
Hello there, good evening. I'm Ateli Edwards. Tonight's top stories from East Asia. Ferdinand Marcos and Donald Trump to talk tariffs and China at the White House. U.S. officials already promising the Philippine president to ramp up military resources to deter Beijing. 2 dead and 10 missing in China's Shandong province after half a year's worth of rain fell in just 5 hours. The families of the Jeju Air crash victims denounce a government report which blames last year's disaster on pilot error. Authorities are now withholding the report. Japan's Sanseito party, a stand-up performer in Sunday's upper house election that dealt a blow to the ruling coalition. We take a closer look at why voters are turning away from the political mainstream. Also in East Asia tonight, the southern Chinese island that's playing a pivotal role in efforts to wean Macau's economy off its gambling addiction. CNA travels to Hengqin to find out how it's also helping to shape the Greater Bay Area. And foreign students are increasingly looking at places other than the U.S. to fulfill their dreams of an overseas education amid clashes between the Trump administration and U.S. universities. Top U.S. officials reaffirming support for Manila in the face of China's growing assertiveness in the South China Sea as President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. prepares for a face-to-face meeting with Donald Trump. He will be the first Southeast Asian leader to hold talks with Mr. Trump in his second term in office. Mr. Marcos has held separate discussions with Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth and Secretary of State Marco Rubio. Both pledged their commitment to the 7-decade defense treaty with Manila. Mr. Hegseth and Mr. Rubio have previously identified China as a top threat and have promised to defend Washington's longtime ally by ramping up military resources.
Our alliance, the United States and the Philippines, have formed a great part in terms of preserving the peace, in terms of preserving the stability of the South China Sea, but I would even go as far as to say in the entire Indo-Pacific region. And we are always very, very happy to continue to strengthen that relationship.
Together we remain committed to the Mutual Defense Treaty. And this pact extends to armed attacks on our armed forces, aircraft, or public vessels, including our Coast Guards, anywhere in the Pacific, including the South China Sea.
Tensions between China and the Philippines have been running high following a series of confrontations in the contested South China Sea. Beijing claims the waters almost entirely as its own, despite an international ruling stating that the assertion has no legal basis. For more on this, we are joined now by Nick Harper, live from Washington, D.C. Now, Nick, White House saying that both leaders will discuss their shared commitment to upholding a free and open Indo-Pacific. What more is Washington hoping to achieve with this?
Yeah, Telly, the Indo-Pacific at the heart of discussions here. But of course, in the background, that really means China. We saw that reaffirmation of commitment from Pete Hegseth in his meeting with President Marcos Jr. And I think we're likely to see more of those commitments throughout the course of the day, all dating back to that 1951 Mutual Defense Agreement, an agreement between the United States and the Philippines, saying that they're both standing ready to defend each other if their interests are attacked at any point in the future. And there is that concern, that real worry on both sides about the growing dominance, the growing assertiveness of China in the South China Sea. We have seen problems, in particular in the Scarborough Shoal, between the Philippines and China in recent months and years. So we heard from Pete Hegseth there, talking also about this idea of not seeking confrontation, but at the same time standing ready and resolute in the South China Sea. So it's all about trying to ramp up deterrence, saying that the US is ready, that it is able to defend the Philippines, but saying that it doesn't plan to do so unless it really needs to. And Hegseth detailed how the US plans to ramp up its commitment, including deploying new cutting-edge missiles to the region, more unmanned systems, and he spoke about revitalizing the defense industrial base. So really trying to reaffirm that commitment, that show of strength between Pete Hegseth and the president when they met here in Washington.
Well, we also know the Philippines are trying to eye a trade deal with the U.S. and some analysts are suggesting that Manila could grant Washington more access to military facilities, all that in exchange for more favorable tariff rates, a move that probably would further rattle Beijing. What more do we know about this deal?
Yeah, that idea of an exchange, it's really what can the Philippines give the United States? Donald Trump loves deal-making, and really today's meeting will, at the heart of it, be all about deal-making. So the Philippines is coming here with some potential concessions that it's able to offer to try and avoid that 20% tariff being placed on goods entering here to the United States. Part of that, as President Marcos says, is creating a strong and mutually beneficial collaboration. So we may see more access to military bases in the Philippines. Back in 2014, there was the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement. At that point, the Philippines gave access to 5 bases. It was expanded back in 2023, an additional 4 bases being added, 4 sites that the United States could use to base troops, to base military equipment. Interesting to note that in April last year, the president said that the US would get no more access to no more additional sites. But now, of course, with tariffs on the horizons, he might use that as a bargaining chip. More access in return for preferential rates. And there's also the possibility that he might give some mining concessions. We know that Donald Trump loves his rare earth minerals. He's looking for deals around the world, like we saw with Indonesia just last week, access to rare earth minerals. And the Philippines' nickel supply, a supply that it already exports to China, is something that the United States might want. So that might also be on the table when it comes to trying reducing that tariff rate.
All right, good to know. Thanks so very much for that report. Nick Harper, live from Washington, D.C. In other news, Sunday's election in Japan is widely regarded as a major setback for the ruling Liberal Democratic Party and its coalition. Now, they lost their upper house majority over what analysts say is a disconnect between traditional parties and voters, and also in part due to a rise in populism. A far-right opposition party, Sanseito, now has 15 seats in the upper house, compared to just 2 previously. Now, they campaigned on Japanese-first policies and are also tough on immigration. One exit poll found that 1 in 5 independent voters had voted for Sanseito. Well, that's more than double the 9% it saw in 2022. The LDP, on the other hand, saw support among unaffiliated voters sink to 20% from 33%. For a deeper look into the rise of Sanseito, we now speak with CNA's Michio Ishida live from Tokyo. So, Mitch, tell us a bit more about Sanseito leader Sohei Kamiya and what are some of its most controversial policy stances?
Well, Oteli, according to the National Diet's website, Sohei Kamiya was born in Fukui Prefecture. He graduated from Kansai University Law School, and he became an assembly member of Osaka's Fukita City. And at that time, he founded a local political organization. And he ran for a seat in the lower house in 2012 with support from the Liberal Democratic Party, but failed to win. And according to Asahi Shimbun, he was active on social media to educate viewers with topics extending from patriotism, international history, medicine, psychology. And in 2020, he founded Sanseito, and that's with a group of 5 members. And he won an upper house seat in 2022. I actually witnessed the party's political campaign, a rally for the first time in 2022. Already they were drawing a huge crowd, and I was surprised of their harsh attitude towards immigrants when Japan needed more foreign workers to address labor shortages. During COVID-19 pandemic, it's criticized mandatory mask wearing and vaccination. This time, Mr. Kamiya ignited anger when he stated Miyagi Prefecture sold their water business to foreign investors. Miyagi Governor barked back, stating it was not true and demanded an apology. And the party's stance on women also created a stir, encouraging women to stay home to bear children amid a low birth rates in Japan, while looking down on older women as not being able to bear children.
So we know that Sanseito made a pretty big impact on the political scene, and that's just in a few short years. So who are the people likely to support them, and why are they doing so?
Well, a media exit poll suggested those in their 30s and 40s were the biggest supporters. The younger generation voted for Democratic Party for the People, another fairly new party that was a big winner this time. And based on analysis, those who used to vote for the ruling Liberal Democratic Party cast their ballots to the two new parties aside from the young voters. LDP is made of conservatives and liberals and some right-wingers. The liberals and moderate conservatives were believed to have voted for DPP and the right-wingers for Sanseito. And those right-wingers, some analysts say, backed the conservative stance of former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, regarded as a rival of incumbent Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba. Analysts think the younger generation were unhappy with the conventional old parties. They also prefer to collect information from social media than from traditional media. Now let's hear from some of their supporters.
今の政治にみんな嫌気がさしてから参政党に来たって分かりやすい構図だと思います。今の石破内閣に全員がノーを突きつけたからこうやって参政党の支持が伸びたと思います。
特にルールを守らない方々が結構増えてきてるなっていうのは多分声には出さないけど思ってる方ってすごく多いと思うんですよ。でそういうこととかあとはやっぱり国民一人一人の負担率、税金面とかがやっぱり大きくなってきてるからやっぱ暮らしがちょっと逼迫してきてるなっていうのは、結構みんな言わないだけで感じてると思うんですよね。
Well, a higher cost of living was one of the key issues in the upper house election. But as the campaign period progressed, based on an NHK survey, the word foreigner was trending, linking it to disrupting order and the rise of crime in Japan. In reality, the number of illegal residents in Japan is low. Still, Sanseito called for tighter restriction towards foreigners, which resonated with electorates who wanted to blame someone else for their unhappiness. And also, Sanseito gained more exposure on traditional media. That began in early July. 5 parliamentarians are needed for its party leader to be invited to a debate of political leaders. Sanseito had 4, but just before the campaign period kicked off, a former Japan Innovation Party parliamentarian joined Sanseito to make the total 5. So Mr. Kamiya was invited to debate. Mr. Ishiba took part in, and he became known nationwide.
Sanseito definitely on the rise, it seems. But are there concerns, though, about this surge, in far-right ultra-conservatism in Japan? Also, what are the chances of them gaining a greater foothold in future elections?
Well, I won't say that there are no worries, but Sanseito, in reality, has only 5 seats in the more powerful lower house. So they do need more seats to have a real impact on the creation of bills, for instance. Having said that, the Prime Minister can dissolve the lower house anytime, and it's natural. The LDP is assessing the best timing to regain seats it's lost in the lower house election in October last year. And given the momentum, it's a chance for Sanseito to field and win more contenders when that happens. Probably the sooner the better for them if they have candidates in mind. Now, Mr. Kamiya said in today's press conference his party won more seats than expected in the upper house election. So now they have to prepare their new parliamentarians to participate in diet sessions this autumn. And a reminder, Sanseito is only the 4th largest opposition party in the upper house. In the lower house, it's a minor party. And some analysts say support for Sanseito could be only a temporary trend.
All right, we'll have to watch and see how Sanseito goes. Thanks so very much for that report. CNA's Michio Ishida live from Tokyo. At least 2 people have died after heavy rains triggered flash floods in China's Shandong province. Rescue efforts are underway to find 10 others who are still missing. Now, state broadcaster CCTV says the Laiwu district in Jinan City received up to more than 360 millimeters of rainfall between midnight and 5 a.m. local time. That's half a year's worth of rainfall in just under 5 hours. The downpour also triggered flash floods near Jinan's mountainous villages, washing away or damaging some 20 homes. Now, the deluge is part of a broader pattern of extreme weather across the country due to the East Asian monsoon. China's southern regions have been inundated with heavy rain after the now downgraded typhoon Wipa made landfall in Guangdong province on Sunday. It's still unclear whether the latest downpours in the country's east are caused by the tropical storm. But climate observers warn that more persistent flash floods could cause further strain on the world's second-largest economy. Families of the victims in South Korea's deadliest plane crash have denounced a government report that blamed the disaster on a pilot error. The Jeju Air Boeing 787-800 plane crash-landed at Muwon International Airport in December last year, killing 179 people. The partial findings were due to be publicized over the weekend, but was called off following objections from the victims' families during a briefing ahead of its release. A representative of the families told AFP that the report said that a bird strike damaged the plane's right engine, and a pilot was heard asking to shut engine number 2, another name for the right engine. The flight data recorder showed the left engine was turned off. The actions resulted in a total power loss and failure of the landing gear system. Now, the representatives also said that no one has directly seen or heard the flight data recorder or cockpit voice recorder. They've demanded a proper explanation. The Jeju Air Pilots Union also criticized the report and rejected what it called the malicious attempt to shift blame onto the pilot. The exact release date of the report is not known, but international rules dictate that one is expected within a year of an accident. Well, time now for a short break, but coming up next on East Asia Tonight, China's largest shipping company seeking to join the consortium that's negotiating to buy up the overseas ports under CK Hutchison. Plus, China's transition of its ride-hailing sector to EVs picks up speed.
In the world of trade, it helps to be part of the network.
Well, not just any network. UOB's network.
The most extensive network in ASEAN.
Through this network, you can connect directly to my business.
And mine.
And mine.
And mine!
With this network, you can source for supplies big
and small across supply chains.
And connect to sector specialists through 500 UOB offices globally.
With access to an end-to-end platform that syncs up your entire value chain.
For a complete view of your trade and cash position across borders on one single interface.
And that's what makes UOB the one bank for ASEAN.
It's where the region's most extensive trade network meets a truly integrated supply chain platform. And there's just one more thing to say. Be part of ASEAN's most extensive trade network.
China's Greater Bay Area pushes the free flow of talent and travel.
If you migrate to other countries, I think it's not as convenient as this one.
But can it revive one of its struggling economic zones?
They are improving, maybe not as fast as the people would expect it.
From Guangdong to Hong Kong and Macau, examining the impact of China's mega region drive. Wednesday on CNA.
Thailand's Prime Minister has been suspended. And it all began with one phone call.
Can you hear me, Uncle?
Yeah. มีกลุ่มที่อยากจะโค่นคุณทักษิณและพรรคเพื่อไทย
Could this lead to a collapse of the government? And what will that mean for Thailand?
เศรษฐกิจพังความมั่นคงไม่เป็นที่น่าไว้วางใจ
Thailand's political turmoil. Insight, Thursday on CNA.
Most of us in Naval Base thought we were different from the rest of the island, as if Singapore was another country. It was the world's largest dry dock. There were about 10,000, if not more, workers in the naval base.
In Philippine Island, my house was actually half steel, half land.
As I squat down, I saw these two big eyes looking at me. Big, huge snake.
The bus is full, so most of us will be hanging on the bus. It's like flying.
So my father decided to go on strike. We had no food on the table.
Hello again. You are watching East Asia tonight, and it is now time for some business news with Roland Lim. So, Roland, Japanese investors, they are returning from a long holiday weekend. What's been the reaction to all the election outcome?
Well, I'll tell you, the volatility in the equities market was unexpected today, despite the outcome being in line with expectations. Japan's benchmark Nikkei reversing earlier gains, closing in the red on the first day of trading after the ruling coalition's defeat in the recent upper house elections. Nikkei 225 closing down for the day, down 0.11%, but the broader topics is flat at 2,836 points. Now, currency traders appear to have mostly priced in the election result, with the yen holding on to gains against the dollar. It is currently unchanged at 147.36 to the dollar. But Japanese bonds remain vulnerable to a sell-off. 10-year yield has eased from hitting its highest level since 2008 last week. The advance in bond yields reflect investor concerns that shift in the political landscape may lead to a looser fiscal policy in Japan. Experts say the market is expected to remain cautious ahead of the August 1st deadline to reach a deal to avert U.S. tariffs. The latest development in Hong Kong tycoon Li Ka-shing's attempt to sell his overseas ports, including two strategic ones along the Panama Canal. China's largest shipping company, COSCO, reportedly seeking to join the global consortium to buy the infrastructure with a significant string attached. It wants veto rights over decisions that could be detrimental to China's interests. COSCO's veto demands are the latest development in the tussle over the Panama ports. Last week, the Wall Street Journal reported that China threatened to derail the sale of C.K. Hutchison's port portfolio if COSCO did not get a stake in the consortium. Remember, earlier in March, C.K. Hutchison was in talks with asset manager BlackRock to sell off its holdings, a move that drew condemnation from China, calling the move, quote, spineless groveling. The two Panama Canal ports owned by Lee's C.K. Hutchison, a point of contention amid the U.S.-China rivalry. U.S. President Trump vowed to take back control of the Panama Canal back in January, accusing China of exercising control over the key waterway. Now, it's a charge that Panama has denied. Shares of COSCO paring back some earlier gains, rising nearly 6%. It ended the day 4.1% higher. Port owner C.K. Hutchison also climbing 3% in Hong Kong. Speaking of the Greater China markets, it's climbing to an 8-month high. The boost coming from construction and power firms after work began on a major dam project in Tibet. Built as the world's largest, Shanghai Composite ending the day 0.6% higher, I should say. Shenzhen up 0.8%. The Hang Seng Index pushing to its highest close since November 21. Chinese tech firms leading the gains. Investors also awaiting fresh catalysts to power the next run-up. Chinese state media says that petrol cars have been banned from ride-hailing platforms in the country's capital starting this week. Beijing now joins Shenzhen, Guangzhou and Xi'an in the transition to electric vehicles on ride-hailing platforms. Now, last month, Xi'an made the move 3 years ahead of schedule. Other cities like Chengdu have also tightened restrictions for petrol-powered vehicles used on the platforms. BYD has reportedly criticized the UK's new EV subsidy scheme. The new $876 billion scheme launched last week offers discounts on battery cars. Now, these are based on the emissions of the electricity grid in the country where the cars were manufactured, and that essentially excludes vehicles made in China. In an interview with the Financial Times, BYD's executive vice president warned the discounts would work like, quote, a drug, hurting the country's market over the longer term. At the same time, BYD has also pledged to create more than 5,000 UK jobs through dealerships by next year. Japan has launched an anti-dumping probe into Chinese and Taiwanese steel. The move follows a petition filed by Nippon Steel and other domestic manufacturers who claim they have been forced to lower prices due to weakening demand domestically, as buyers have shifted to cheaper imports. The Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry and the Ministry of Finance plan to complete the investigation within a year and will then decide whether to impose anti-dumping duties. Japan joins a list of other nations, including South Korea, India and Vietnam, involved in anti-dumping against Chinese steel. And that'll do it for Business. Otelli.
Thanks very much for that, Roland. Well, on that note, we are going to go for a break now, but coming up next on East Asia tonight.
This new train line opened just last December. It connects Macau and Hengqin via a 2.2 kilometers railway. In just 2 minutes, we'll be right across the border.
We travel to a lackluster special economic zone in China and look at the efforts being made to reverse its fortunes.
Biodiversity is booming, which is inviting for some local foragers and farmers who embrace edible wildlife.
We're the largest organic banana grower in Singapore.
This is a jam.
Amazing. So the mulberries are from the garden.
No, that's delicious.
Singapore is ramping up conservation efforts locally and across the region.
I really do love reptiles and finding out about them, so I really love my job.
Building must relate to the lives of the people.
目前还是一直要创新一些新的东西，我也不希望是人家把我看作是80岁的人。
There are those who dare to be different, who have made their mark in Singapore and beyond.
You have such big dreams, you want to change the world with your art.
Obviously, every fighter wants to win, so all you can do is to prepare yourself to win.
In Singapore, something happens every minute. Each event vying for your attention. We're always there to cover the news. But what if we also give you more? What if we told you we go deep into the data, find stories you care about, and explain issues clearly, from housing to healthcare, security to sustainability? We give you the bigger picture on Singapore Tonight.
3, 2,
Hello and good evening. I'm Shahida Othman. Tonight's top stories.
This is East Asia Tonight, and here are the headlines we are following. Ferdinand Marcos Jr. and Donald Trump to talk tariffs in China at the White House. U.S. officials already promising the Philippine president ramping up military resources to deter Beijing. 2 dead and 10 missing in China's Shandong province after half a year's worth of rain fell in just 5 hours. The families of the Jeju Air crash victims denounce a government report which blames last year's disaster on pilot error. Authorities are now withholding that report. For years, China has poured billions of dollars into developing quieter cities to even out economic growth, dangling tax incentives and funding to draw the crowd. But not every venture has succeeded. Well, Deborah Wong travels to the southern Chinese island of Hengqin to find out how it can revive interest.
At just over 104 square kilometers, Hengqin is 3 times larger than Macau. While Hengqin is geographically part of the southern Chinese city of Sohei, at the nearest point, Hengqin and Macau are only around 187 meters apart. As part of Beijing's plan to wean Macau off its dependence on gaming, Hengqin was designated as a special economic zone in 2009 to support Macau's growth. But progress has been slow. In recent years, there's been renewed effort to revive Hengqin's fortunes.
This new train line opened just last December. It connects Macau and Hengqin via a 2.2 kilometers railway. In just 2 minutes, we'll be right across the border. Beyond deepening Macau's integration into the Greater Bay Area, this added convenience is also expected to drive migration into the Hengqin Cooperation Zone.
The new train line joins a mesh of tunnels, roads and highways that connect Hengqin Island and Macau across a narrow waterway, giving the special administrative region more space to diversify its economy. For one Macau company, space is exactly what it needs.
In a well-established city like in Shenzhen and Guangzhou, everything is there. They can't open some door, or they can't change things or adapt things for them to try new stuff. But in Hengqin, got some like unmanned aircraft on the road doing the testing, a manned system, ecosystem for people to try new idea there. Because it is not that crowded.
Ken Lai founded his company in 2020 in the former Portuguese colony. In March, he set up a bigger office in Hengqin to consolidate his teams within the Greater Bay Area.
之前我哋係公司係雲州一個地方，咁所以可能有啲溝通上，就會需要可能要揸車過去嗰邊，跟住要開個 meeting 咁樣，就所以比較麻煩。但係而家搬咗嚟橫琴嘅話，佢可以結合到珠海嘅同事同埋澳門嘅同事，就係同一個辦公嘅場所咁樣可以做一個交流，即係所有嘅消息嘅通訊方面都會比較流暢啦，可以。
Moreover, Macau companies and residents enjoy preferential tax rates of 15% on top of funding to help them hire talent. In 2021, the central government in Beijing released a new blueprint, placing Hengqin under Guangdong and Macau through a co-management system. This as integration between Macau and Hengqin remains underwhelming. Over 50% of Hengqin's Grade A office buildings stood empty in 2023, sparking a policy to convert them into hotel rooms to serve a growing domestic tourist crowd. The newly built houses too are still waiting for tenants.
We have like, as I said, 16 to 20 people there. Actually, only 3 or 4 of them living in Hengqin. I still live in Macau because our family and friends, we are still in Macau. And we got more shop and restaurants in Macau, more activity in Macau. Hengqin, like those infrastructure stuff, the school, the hospital, they're building up, but they don't have many choices as well. They're improving, maybe not as fast as the people would expect it.
In 10 years, lawmakers expect about 80,000 Macau residents to work in Hengqin and 120,000 to live there. It's clear that the island still has much work to do.
For more on this, we are joined by Pan Xuanming, a Senior Research Fellow at the Guangzhou Institute of Greater Bay Area, as well as CNA's Deborah Wong joining us from Shenzhen. First to you, Deborah. You mentioned in the story there that the central government in Beijing is making a fresh push to develop Hengqin. Why is it that the leaders care so much about the development of this tiny place?
Well, quite simply because Macau needs the space to diversify its economy. You know, it wants to reduce reliance on gaming from about 80% of its GDP to about 40% by the year 2028. And that urgency to give Macau that infrastructure space to do so, to explore new engine growths, really accelerated during the pandemic, where we saw a tourism revenue drop, gaming revenue drop, and it really hurt Macau's economy during those years. Now, we attended a tech fair in Macau quite recently, and we also saw quite a number of companies from mainland China, specifically as well from the island of Hengqin. There were some semiconductor firms there. We spoke to, the executives there, and they told us that the reason why, they're going to attend the trade fair in Macau, and the reason why they want to explore opportunities in Macau to see better integration is because of the talent. They say that the island's proximity to Macau talent really does give them greater access to the Portuguese-speaking world. So if you take a step back and look at China as a whole, we can also see that Macau and Hengqin's integration does, help serve as a conduit between China and foreign investment.
Now, let's bring you in here, Dr. Pan. China has a pretty big ambition. They aim to hit 75% urbanization by 2035. In a way, does that mean that there will be a lot more infrastructure than population? And in this case, then, should Hengqin avoid going down that path?
Thank you for your question. Yes, I think in terms of the infrastructure and the urbanization, China has done a very good job in the past 2 decades. And I think in 2015, I think the urbanized rate of cities are about like 56%. And now this year, I think it has risen to probably like 67% or more. So it's an increase of 10% in the last 10 years. So obviously, there's a very significant increase in the space and the urbanization of infrastructures in China. But at the same time, in the last few years, we can see 2 significant changes. The first is the population drop. I think now the birth rate and the population increase rate has significantly came into a very low growth period, and it drops from like 1.3% to perhaps like 0.6 or 0.7% in the next few years. So that's the first point. And the second point is the living space is, I think it's enough for most of the cities. And for most cities, on average, I think every citizen have like one room for them, including through the living spaces. So, and I think in the future, I would not see there will be a very big stimulus to the increase of infrastructure in the future. Instead of the hard infrastructure, I will envisage an increase of soft infrastructure. It means that you are not going to buy spaces, you are going to buy more services in your space. Like public services, like 5G, like other living services, community services. So that will be the future of development of the cities in China, especially in the Greater Bay Area, including Hengqin.
Right. So, Deborah, Hengqin is a tiny place, but for those of our viewers who haven't been to this place, it actually lies just below well-established cities, Tier 1 cities like Guangzhou and Shenzhen. So what do the people make of it? I mean, does it make it more challenging to convince people to move over there?
In a way, yes. My own experience traveling around Hengqin while shooting this story was that it was really quiet. You know, the streets were quite empty, and we had a conversation with the taxi driver who was driving us around. He said that business is really slow. He hasn't made much money because there really isn't enough people on the island, enough passengers on the island for him to drive around. Now, companies who require greater access as well to supply chains in the heart of Guangdong, where Dongguan is, where Zhongshan is, you know, they would rather also base their operations out of inland cities like Guangzhou. But Hengqin, we have to remember, has its own draw as well. We must remember that it primarily serves, the residents of Macau. It really wants to integrate Macau into the Greater Bay Area. So the proximity works for those people like Ken Lai that you heard in the story, because Macau is just next to Hengqin. He gets to commute there very often. The only issue that Ken Lai also raised, and that's, the same concern that a lot of people have, is that amenities are lacking at the moment. They are still going to be built. So it really is quieter. And now it really all depends on how enticed they are by the preferential tax rates, whether the tax rebates do make economical sense for them to move over.
Right. To you again, Dr. Pan.
I just want to bring you in here. When we talk about...
Go ahead, Deborah.
Dr. Pan, I just want to bring you in here. When we talk about China, as a whole, it's not just Guangdong, but also the central government aims to even out economic distribution, and that's something that they've highlighted in their work report every year. Do you think that's influenced priorities and growth regions in different provinces?
Yes. As I mentioned in the last answer to the last question, I will envisage increase in the soft infrastructure instead of the hard infrastructure as compared to the past experience, because China invests heavily in infrastructure in the past few decades, railroad, like real estate. In the future, I think China will invest more in the tech sector, including 5G, automation of cars, automation of driving, new energy, electronic vehicles, sort of that. And I think this will be the future for the industries as developed in Hengqin. And we will see the growth in digital economy and green economy in the future. And I think this will also be the future for Hengqin. So we will envisage an increase in these sectors, and I will see this as a new engine for the development of cities in China. And Hengqin will definitely set up a sample for the Chinese cities.
But Dr. Pan, there are people on social media saying that the high cost of living there actually makes Zhuhai perhaps a more attractive place. Are authorities doing anything about that?
It depends on which city you compare to. So if you compare to Hong Kong, I think, or you compare to Macau, in Hengqin, the living cost is relatively low. But compared to the mainland in other cities, I think in Hengqin, the real estate prices are relatively high at this moment. But it depends on what kind of business or what kind of communities are you looking for to offshore in this area? Like for many Macau residents, I think they are still looking into buying new opportunities, buying new apartments in Hengqin, because the Macau government encouraged the Macau residents to move in Hengqin. And I will see an increase of Hengqin residents, especially from Macau.
Right. And Dr. Pan, there is a lot of talk about Hengqin wanting to focus on like TCM, which is traditional Chinese medicine, tech, culture, tourism, etc. But how far do you think that's going to help help Macau diversify, and what are some of the indicators we should look at to track its progress?
Yes. These four pillars of the new industries are very important for Hengqin, but actually they are the starting point of new industries, because when you mention TCM, tech, culture, tourism, it connected to other industries. For example, for TCM, it connected to biotech, medical services. So when you invest in TCM, you're actually investing on the other biotech and medical industries in Hengqin. So I will envisage an increase of industrial development and especially the jobs increase in Hengqin that provide for the Macau residents in the future. So I think the authorities in Hengqin and in Macau as well, they're doing a very good job to attract business and investment in these 4 industries. And in addition to these 4 industries, they have, I think, find some new opportunities to develop the connected industries, such as the medical services, biotech, and EV and other electronic services. So I would see this as a very good future for industrial development.
Well, I've certainly learned a lot about Hengqin. Thanks so very much for sharing. Pan Xuanming, Senior Research Fellow at the Guangzhou Institute of Greater Bay Area, and of course CNA's Deborah Wong in Shenzhen. All right, time now for another break, but coming up on East Asia tonight, higher education in the U.S. becoming less enticing to foreign students as the Trump administration cuts grants and curbs admissions. A discussion on the broader impact on America's soft power next.
At Ya-Kun, we try to be more than coffee and toast. My grandfather started the business when Singapore didn't have much. He believed in quiet generosity, even letting customers pay later if they couldn't afford it. We try to unite our community for a good cause through Ya-Kun's Cherish app. Through points converted into dollar equivalents, customers can redeem points to offset part of their next purchase or donate their points for good causes. We work with local charities to support local communities and another that has beneficiaries in the region.
My first social initiative was delivering drinks and toast to patients at Tan Tock Seng Hospital. I'll never forget an elderly lady who smiled so warmly when she received her coffee and toast. That reminds me how small acts of kindness can bring so much care and comfort to people in need.
Doing good isn't just about giving back. It's about rallying the community around you and finding ways to make a difference with every bit of support.
China's Greater Bay Area pushes the free flow of talent and travel.
If you migrate to other countries, I think it's not as convenient as this one.
But can it revive one of its struggling economic zones?
They are improving, maybe not as fast as the people would expect it.
From Guangdong to Hong Kong and Macau, examining the impact of China's mega region drive. Wednesday on CNA.
Thailand's Prime Minister has been suspended.
ความเป็นผู้นำของเขาเนี่ยมันไม่มีพอ
And it all began with one phone call.
Can you hear me, Uncle?
Yeah.
มีกลุ่มที่อยากจะโค่นคุณทักษิณและพรรคเพื่อไทย
Could this lead to a collapse of the government? And what will that mean for Thailand?
เศรษฐกิจพังความมั่นคงไม่เป็นที่น่าไว้วางใจ
Thailand's political turmoil. Insight, Thursday on CNA.
Singapore, you've heard of it, but do you know it? Next on Singapore Hour.
It's a buzzing neighborhood that never sleeps. Find out why.
You smell it before you see it. It's the durian.
Experience the great analog revival with a collector who has over 6,000 records.
All these records cannot be found on Spotify.
All this and more on Singapore Hour, Friday on CNA.
I'm Teresa Tang, host of the CNA Correspondent Podcast. Every week, I go behind the scenes with our network of journalists to get their on-the-ground insight, analysis, and anecdotes as they cover stories in Asia and beyond.
What was it like being with the hostage's father?
It was emotional, to say the least.
Candid conversations that are in-depth and enlightening. So this Southeast Asia trip for President Xi, it's very deliberate.
Yeah, after those sweeping tariffs, China is really trying to shore up its alliances in the region.
I have to ask, what did they serve on the papal plane?
Tiramisu. It was the best tiramisu I've ever had in my life.
Make the CNA Correspondent Podcast a weekly habit. Find us on the CNA or Me Listen apps, YouTube, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
Harvard University back in court as it tries to restore some $2.5 billion in federal grants. Protesters gathered outside the Boston courthouse, urging the judge to reverse the cuts imposed by the Trump administration. Harvard says it has been forced to freeze hiring and pause research in critical areas such as cancer and infectious diseases.
You've heard that the stakes for Harvard couldn't be higher, right? Field-defining research trapped in limbo, life-saving clinical trials terminated, hundreds of staff losing their jobs, tenure-track professors receiving layoff notices. And make no mistake, these attacks are blatantly unconstitutional.
NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang told reporters in Beijing last week that many Chinese academics had left the U.S. amid worsening relations, calling the exodus an enormous loss for America. Now, other observers fear that the curbs on foreign students risk undermining U.S. soft power. Also, a report published by the State Department shows a steady decline in the number of students from mainland China in the U.S. over the past 3 academic years. A diminishing U.S. entries could mean big business elsewhere. New Zealand's government has announced a plan to double its international education market by 2034. And under that plan, it will relax rules around international students working part-time. For more insights, let's bring in Professor Brandon Cantwell from the Department of Educational Administration at Michigan State University. Well, welcome to East Asia Tonight, Professor. So let's just start with this shift that we are seeing. America's no longer the default destination for Chinese students and some academics. How much of that is actually tied to politics, policy, and perhaps perception?
It's hard to know. Of course, there are a lot of factors that go into where a student or scholar chooses to study or to work. And certainly the world has become more competitive in terms of offering academic programs and opportunities for research. And so the United States faces quite a lot of competition now, and that has only increased over the years. All that said, the uncertainty and the hostile environment that is created by the Trump administration undoubtedly plays a role in changing perceptions about the United States as a welcoming place for international students and scholars. And it's hard to imagine that that is not contributing to the declining numbers that you showed just before.
And China's been pretty vocal in the past about how the U.S. politicizes education. How do you think China's end? I mean, how are they viewing these developments right now?
You know, I think that the Chinese government has been pretty clear that it does not see the exchange of students as something that is a problem for the bilateral relationship. Trump has tried to tie international student visas to trade negotiations, and it's my understanding that the Chinese government has rejected that. So I think that my assessment is that the Chinese government would prefer to see the status quo where exchange continues to occur, and maybe that exchange is reflective of changing market positions, of growing strength in higher education on China's part, but that an abrupt break or a real souring of the academic relationship between the two countries is not something that China seems to be encouraging. That said, I do think that the Chinese government is realistic about the potential risks that students face if they come to the United States in terms of uncertainty of having their visas revoked or having their program of study interrupted, and are communicating that possibility to students.
Also, I mean, Harvard, can get hit like this, right? I mean, who's next? Do you think other top-tier universities could also find themselves in the firing line?
The pressure that the administration is putting on higher education is pretty intense. Harvard is in the spotlight right now. Before that, it was Columbia University. Just about any major U.S. university is open to being put into conflict with the administration. Right now, a lot of the battle is over research funding. That actually matters quite a lot when it comes to international student exchange. More than half of the international students in the United States are at the graduate level, and they're involved in high-level research activities. And so the challenge that universities are facing, that students are facing, are not just about visas and geopolitical tensions, but also about the availability of funding to support their study and the research that they're doing.
And let's say if the court sides with the Trump administration in the end, what kind of precedent are we looking at?
I think that the administration has demonstrated that this time around they're pretty persistent. They want to keep the pressure on higher education. They feel like universities are not complying with the government's preferences. Even if the court rules in Harvard's favor, I think that the administration is going to continue to put pressure on colleges and universities, and it's not going to be the end of the story.
So, in a nutshell, Professor, what is at stake here? There's going to be less global movement of students. There's going to be less exchange of ideas across the borders. What does that mean in terms of the future of innovation, or be it international cooperation?
Yeah, I think it's been pretty clear. The evidence is really striking that international exchange leads to increased innovation, drives science and technology forward, and it's also important for building relationships between countries. It's an important geopolitical tool for the stability of the economy, and I don't want to overplay it too much, but for world peace and global order, I think that if that system breaks down, and it is starting to break down, then it's just going to be harder for major powers to interact with each other, to understand each other, and it's certainly going to put a damper on innovation and the progress of science.
So students, or Chinese students especially, they are starting to look elsewhere. So we've got countries like, we talked about how New Zealand want to ramp up intake, even Singapore, Malaysia, and Southeast Asia, they all seem to be stepping up. These alternatives, just how viable are they?
They're viable for a number of students, and I think that we will definitely see diversity of destinations where the United States for China and other major sending countries will be less of the main attraction. It will probably continue to be a large receiving country of international students from China and elsewhere, but its place as the number one will be challenged by other countries, by New Zealand, by their offerings in East Asia, perhaps by the UK's continued role. But there is limited capacity. The size of those higher education systems just can't compare with the United States, which is very large, very well developed. Other countries face political challenges when it comes to educational migrants too. This has been a challenge for the Australian government and the Canadian government and the British government. So I think that while there will be a diversion of students to other systems, we can't really replace the United States very easily, and the overall effect will probably be somewhat diminished global exchange.
Hey, thanks so much for your time and thoughts, Professor Brandon Cantwell, Michigan State University. And that pretty much wraps up East Asia tonight. Don't forget your headlines anytime at cna.asia, and look us up on Facebook and YouTube. Thanks for your company.